welcome to my channel. You may have noticed the audio and video quality skyrocketed since the last time I was here. It's because I'm being filmed on a $30,000 camera and I have a new mic set up to help with the overall quality. Don't get used to it, I've only got this $30,000 camera on loan, but the microphone will be a permanent upgrade. Alright, so let's get started. This week we're going to talk about book covers. My brand new novel, Sprites and Blue Jets, is available right now on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble. You can pick up a copy as an ebook, paperback, or hardcover. Book covers are an incredibly important aspect to any writer's portfolio. The fact is that people do judge books by their covers, even though the old saying says you're not supposed to. The fact is that if you're an independent author, if you're self-publishing, you have to do the book cover yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to make it yourself, but you've either got to create it yourself or you've got to hire someone to do it. I would highly recommend hiring someone to make your book cover for you. I would never ever recommend using your self-publisher's platform's sort of auto book cover generator. We'll look at what some examples of that can look like. And I would never recommend doing it yourself unless you are in fact a graphic designer or artist. Although, as you'll see, you'll need both artistic skill and graphic design skill in order to design a quality book cover. Alright, so let's get started today. Today we're going to look at some examples of some really poorly designed book covers. None of the book covers that I'm going to show you are actual real books. I didn't want to step on any author's toes. All the examples we're going to look at today are completely fictitious. If the author's name or book name happen to be real, that is strictly coincidental. These book covers and the author names I just completely made up out of whole cloth. So we're going to look at some book cover designs that are really bad. We're going to sort of break them down and explain why they're not so good. And then in the end, we're going to look at the Red Sprites and Blue Jets book cover. And we're going to talk a little bit about the process of designing it. We're going to talk a little bit about how I made it and the progression from the initial design to the final book cover, the final completed cover. Alright everyone, let's start by taking a look at some poorly designed book covers and let's discuss how they can be improved. So the first example is a completely fictional book by Jeff Smith. Again, the name and author are completely made up. If they happen to be the name of a real author or real book, that is strictly coincidental. But we're just going to kind of look at some examples of some book covers that are really horribly designed. So for example, you may use a template that your self-publisher's website offers you, which is not a good idea. And this first book cover is actually an example of what that can look like. It doesn't look very good. So the first book is The Dark Cabin by Jeff Smith. Now, you may notice the title is a bit difficult to see. If you haven't found the title yet, I'll help you out with some arrows. You can see there's the title. As you can see, it's almost impossible to read unless you know where to look, because this cover is just so horribly designed. So there's a number of issues with this cover. The first one is that this looks like a template. This looks like one of those things where you just type in the name of the author, the name of the book, and it just automatically puts it in for you. But the problem is, it doesn't format it for you. It doesn't actually make it look professional. So here's the thing. What you want to do with a book cover is you want to make sure that there's a sort of theme, or sort of a continuous sort of styling to the entire thing. The issue is that the title sort of suggests like a thriller or a horror novel, the Dark Cabin. And even the cover picture kind of suggests that as well. The problem is the font does not suggest that. The font looks like a middle school essay. It looks like Times New Roman or maybe Arial. It just doesn't look particularly appealing. It doesn't seem to match the genre. Maybe the genre isn't horror after all, but certainly the cover font should be visible. You shouldn't have difficulty being able to read it. So let's take a look at this. Generally with book covers, what you want to do, and there are exceptions to every rule, of course, but generally what you want to do is you want to make sure that the font is fairly large. You usually, particularly with the title, you want to typically have the font go from close to one side of the book to the other. Because the fact is that books are relatively small. They're not like movie posters, for instance, where they're, 24 inches by 30 inches, for example. Books are usually like 6 by 9 inches, typically. That's sort of like the trade paperback size. So you want to make sure that the font goes across the entire cover generally. Again, there's exceptions if the design accounts for it. Like if the book is about how someone is really lonely, you could use a very small font size as a visual metaphor for how lonely they are. You could have the title be, for example, Lost in the Woods, for instance, is maybe the title. And the font is really small because the idea is that this person is by themselves, there's no one around them. So the font is small as a metaphor for how the person is also feels small in a world where there's no one around them. However, generally you want to avoid that unless it's intentional. You don't want to do that on accident. So with this cover, it would make sense to have the font be larger. It would make sense to have the font sort of match the styling. And again, this is probably a thriller, so we're going to want to have something a bit more visually pleasing for the font. Like I said, generally you want the font to go from one side to the other because the book is going to be relatively small. It's going to be competing with a lot of other books. And you want people to see your book, you want them to read the title quickly and easily, and you want them to immediately have an idea for what the genre is and what the feel of the book is. So let's take a look at the corrected version. This is just an example of how you could potentially update this cover design. You do not have to do it like this. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But this design, I think, is reminiscent of sort of noir or thriller or horror, which I think certainly the title appears to be. And this cover design definitely backs up that idea. So you'll notice that the title, The Dark Cabin, is now visible. You can actually easily read it near the bottom of the book cover, and the actual font goes from one side of the book to nearly the other side, which is very much in style right now. Again, if you're going to break modern sort of formatting trends, you can absolutely do that. But just be sure you're doing it intentionally. You can't break the rules until you know the rules. So you've got to know what the rules are with modern design so that you can then break them if your product or project, project serves that purpose. So here you can see that I added a bit of red to the background, red being blood. Red represents blood and danger and death, so definitely makes sense for a book like this. The title is bigger, the author name is a lot bigger and also has a red background. Again, this is just for consistency. I want things to look the same. I don't want it to look like it was just randomly thrown together. So the other thing I did was I changed the background image to black and white. It no longer has a color to it because I feel like it makes more sense to go with this sort of eerie black and white. And you can see you can't really see the actual image very clearly. You can clearly see the trees, but you can't see much else, which I think adds to the horror and the mystery of this book design, in my opinion. And then you'll notice I added a tagline, and this is important. The tagline in this case is a place where death is only step one. This is a really, really important thing to add to your book because, again, people do judge a book by the cover. They'll spend a couple of seconds, maybe, looking at your cover, and then they'll move on. So by having that tagline there, it helps to back up everything else. Everything should go together. So the title of the book, The Dark Cabin, hints that it might be a horror, that it might be a noir, that it might be a thriller, perhaps. But by having that tagline, it helps back that up so that the reader has an idea of what they're getting into. So the tagline and the title give away clearly this is an adult novel. This is not for teens. This is not for middle grade. This is for adults. And it says, a place where death is only step one. So that certainly gives away that this is probably not only a thriller, perhaps horror, but it's supernatural. That gives away this is probably a supernatural book, which is really good, having this tagline here. It helps to attract the kind of audience that would likely want to read this book in the first place. So again, there are a lot of different ways you could do the book cover. This is only one example, but I guarantee that this design is significantly better than the other design where you couldn't even read the title. Let's take a look at another example called The Golden Tree. Again, this is just a made-up book. This book maybe exists, but I didn't copy anything. I just came up with the title out of whole cloth. So the title, The Golden Tree, you can see this book looks really bad, and I've seen a number of books that are self-published that have a design like this. They just look absolutely awful. The problem with this is that it looks like the author used the template that came with their self-publishing platform. So most self-publishing platforms like Lulu or Ingram Spark or I think CreateSpace and a few others, they'll have a place where you can design your book cover, but they're generally really generic. They just say, type in the name of the book, the title, type in the author, type in a tagline, and then you just put it in. The problem is they don't format it for you. They just put it there. So you end up with like 12-point font. You end up with Times New Roman or Arial maybe. You end up with a really generic, boring-looking book cover with no styling, no intrigue or anything. And then, of course, you can often add a photograph, which I've done here. And this photograph is obviously really generic and boring, and you can see that it's improperly formatted. It's stretched in a really hideous way. So what probably happened was the author found this really, really nice picture of a tree, but it was a vertical picture. It was a portrait image of a tree, but the template only allows you to put that picture in horizontally. It's actually a horizontal place or horizontal sort of template for the image. And so it looks really awful. It looks just absolutely terrible. This would attract no one's attention. If I were a reader, I would skip right over this. I would assume that the author didn't care about the writing of the book, since they clearly didn't care about the cover design. This looks like they went into the template and said the golden tree inner, and then they tried to put it in the center of the book. They center aligned it, and then they said Sam Johnson right align, and then that's it. So let's take a look at what we can do to make this look significantly better. Because the fact is, I thought that only math textbooks had designs this horrible, but it turns out that fiction novels do too. And math textbooks don't have to look good because they're required reading for anyone in school. But if you're a self-published or even traditionally published author, you really want people to want to pick up your book. So let's take a look at this updated cover design. So as you can see, what I've done is I've done a lot of what I did on the previous book cover design. The font is significantly bigger, and the overall formatting is just significantly better. So first off, I made the picture, fill up the entire book cover from corner to corner. You can have a frame around the edge of your book cover. A lot of books do, but you want to make sure it's intentional. Again, always break the rules if you know the rules. Adding frames, honestly, just shrinks the effective size of the book cover. It doesn't actually add much to the book cover unless it's intentional. Like if the book is about someone who is writing in a journal. If the book, like if it's Diary of a Wimpy Kid, for example, having a frame around the edge could actually make the book cover look more like a journal. So it actually fits the actual narrative of the story. Here, I didn't do that. Here, the picture of the tree fills the whole cover, as you can see. It fills the picture, or it fills the space, the 6x9 area, which is much better. It makes it more vivid. It makes it more attention-grabbing. You'll see that it's a bit more vivid in terms of the color palette as well. I cranked up the colors a little bit because it's called the golden tree, so that golden color is obviously an important part of the story. The title and picture don't give away super in-depth what the actual plot is or what the story or the intended target audience are, but it certainly isn't. It certainly doesn't seem like horror. Obviously, it doesn't seem like a thriller. It seems like it's probably an adult novel, maybe, but it doesn't seem like it would be, particularly inappropriate for children or teens to read. But of course, you'd want to look at the synopsis on the back to get a good picture of who the intended audience is. As for the cover design itself, you can see that I altered the font completely. You'll notice that the font has been changed to a golden color, hence the golden tree, so it matches the styling. Everything goes together well. I gave it not cursive, but sort of a fancy-looking font to imply a sort of whimsical, summery, upbeat feel. That's sort of my thinking with this cover, is that it's probably a book that has a upbeat story to it. You'll notice I made the font bigger, and you'll notice that the author's name is a lot bigger and easier to read, and it has the same styling as the title font. And the last thing I did was added a novel, which is something that's incredibly important. I've been in a number of bookstores, and I've done quite a bit of research. It's not required by any means to put a novel, but if your book isn't part of a series or isn't incredibly famous, like the Hunger Games or whatever, I would recommend adding that, particularly if it's unclear. So, for example, if your book cover is, or if the title of your book is An Uneventful Day, for example, That could easily be a nonfiction book. Theoretically, it could be about it could be a biographical book about a particular person and their uneventful day. Adding a novel just helps to make it clear. The Golden Tree, that could theoretically be a book about nature. It could be a book about different types of trees, theoretically. So by having it say a novel, it helps to clarify, okay, this is a fictional story with a narrative three-act structure. That's the important thing about having it say a novel on the cover. A lot of novels do this. So again, I would recommend that you do it if you want it to be 100% clear to your readers or potential readers that your book is in fact a fictional novel. So that's an important thing to do. As for the rest of it, again, it's a pretty simplistic design. It isn't an overly complicated design. You can have overly complicated designs. It doesn't hurt to do this. It can actually help to differentiate your book from everyone else's. I would just be very careful, again, if you're going to have a design that has a bunch of different elements on it, lots of small details, you're just going to want to be careful that at least the main details are easily visible. So let's take a look at my book. My book is called Red Sprites and Blue Jets. It's my brand new children's novel. It just came out a few months ago. It's available on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble. We're going to take a look at the book cover and look at the design process a little bit. So the first thing I want to say is that I'm not a professional artist. I am a graphic designer, but I'm not an artist. And the fact is that to make a book cover, you really need to have both. You need to have a graphic design sense and an artistic sense. I lack, for the most part, the artistic sense. So I hired someone to do the graphic design, and that person is a friend of a friend named Selena Basham. She is a very talented artist. She was able to help design and create the book cover for me. I sent her a sort of digital amalgamation of what I wanted, and she was able to work with me to get the cover designed. So that's really awesome. I'm really happy for her to do that. The only part of this cover that I actually created was the lightning bolt, and that's it. Because again, unless you are a professional artist and the graphic designer, I would highly recommend, even if it costs a little bit of money, paying someone to create your cover design. If you try to do it yourself, especially after you're stressed and after you're in rush mode because you just finished writing the book and you're getting it edited, you're not going to want to think about the book cover. You're not going to want to think about graphic design. So I would encourage you to pay someone, even if it's $100, $200 to do a cover design for you. It's worth it. It'll help it sell better because people do in fact judge books by their cover. So the initial design I received looked a bit like this. As you can see, the aspect ratio isn't correct for the actual shape of the book, but that's okay. I was able to adjust that. And there's no title font on there. That's because I actually did that myself. I would highly recommend, or at least I would at least encourage you to consider maybe doing, well, see, I'm a graphic designer, so I was able to create the actual font for the titles myself. But if you are not, just make sure that when you hire your designer that you tell them, okay, this is the aspect ratio of the book. And if they've made a book before, they'll know how to format it properly from there. So tell them, this is a 6x9 trade paperback, for example, and then they will know what to do in Illustrator or InDesign or whatever program they're using to create the cover. This right here is the first version of the book cover. As you can see, it is the correct aspect ratio at I don't even know what it is. It's like 5.8 by some other number. It's kind of a random book size. It's not 6x9. It's not the trade paperback size. I chose not to do that because the book is a children's novel. Not that children's novels are not ever available in 6x9. I just felt that it made more sense to have it be a bit smaller, the actual physical size. So anyway, this is the initial book cover. As you can see, a lot of the design elements that ended up in the final one are there, but there's issues with this cover. The title of the book, for example, is pretty long. It's not the longest title, but it's Red Sprites and Blue Jets, and because it's such a long title, it doesn't really take up a bunch of space on the book cover, and that's kind of a problem because, again, modern book design trends, typically, you have the font size be relatively large. Because you want it to fill up a sizable portion of the front of the cover, so it's easy to read, it's eye-catching, people immediately know what the name of the book is. And the other mistake I made was the title there, or the author name rather, Andy Silvers. Only the first letter is capitalized. which is perfectly good for the inside of the book, but I've done a lot of research on this. There's the two most common sort of stylings I've seen for the author name is it's either all caps, every single letter in the author name is capitalized, or it's the opposite. Every single letter is lowercase. And you have to decide for yourself what makes the most sense. But for me, I did neither of those, which I think is a problem. I think it looks more like a cover of an essay, not the cover of a novel. So let's take a look at the second iteration. So the second iteration, I didn't fix any of those problems right away because I didn't notice them right away. But you'll notice I did increase the size of the author name a bit, and I increased it even more with each iteration because generally you do want the text, the author name, and the book title to be pretty big on the cover so it's really easy to see and it catches the reader's attention, and I altered the lighting a little bit from the first and second iteration. The third iteration, as you can see, I made things even bigger. But what you'll notice is I didn't really realize what the problem was. I just iterated it to you, which is that I needed to capitalize all the letters in the author name, and the title, Red Sprites and Blue Jets, is still really long. So it isn't able to be made really big without it going over the edges of the book. So what eventually occurred to me was that I should take the word and, the and in the title, and flip it sideways so that I can take the overall title size and crank it up. And then this is also around the time I realized that the author name needed to be all caps as well, and I made some other adjustments, including brightening up the image. So let's take a look. So here is the final design for the book. This is the one that is available on Amazon.com right now. So the thing is, I ordered the proof copy of the book, and the actual image, the actual photograph that's in the background of the book, it was too dark. It was very dark. You could barely see it. So I brightened the overall image up by around 30-35%, which helped a lot. And then, like I told you, I took the and in the title and flipped it sideways so that I could crank up the overall size of the title, making it easier to read on Amazon, and easier to read as a thumbnail. I'm just showing you some common mistakes that a lot of authors or graphic designers and artists make with the book cover that causes their book not to actually sell very well, which is ultimately the biggest problem of all if your book isn't selling. So that is a little bit of insight, at least, into the book cover design process and how to improve it. I can do more videos in the future on this process if you would like. You can actually put in the comment section what you want to see, but I'll probably do maybe another book, not another book. I mean, I am going to write more books in the future, but I'm going to do another video on maybe book covers and formatting, the interior formatting of the book, and a video on self-publishing versus traditional publishing, perhaps. Why I chose to do self-publishing and why some authors choose to do traditional publishing. Be sure to like and subscribe. My name is Andy Silvers. I'm a writer, graphic designer, and author, and I hope to catch you in the next video.